Oh my God. Now everybody knows I use Lipsil. What's up, people? We're live. We are live. And okay, short notice. I can't say we're going to go longer than an hour and a half because that's like midnight my time, which is like 4 o'clock in the morning, young person time. Okay, so how is everybody doing while everyone filters in on short notification? This is sort of like a check-in stream. It's a follow-up stream. It is an addressing one of the comments which I picked out of my last video to turn into a community tab, comment fest. We've got Uncivil Law who's going to come in. I'm seeing if Nate Brody can get in. I don't know if Nate is going to get in because not everybody is around with 2-minute notice for a stream. But when the kids are asleep and I can get down into the basement, that's the time live streams happen. Okay, so let's see here. We're gonna say hi to some people in no particular order, but I picked the one that I like the most already. Dude, you are brilliant. I grew up with lawyers, and you are batshit crazy. If I had a nickel for every time I heard that, I might have at the very least $50 divided by 5 cents, which would be I don't know. Let's hear it. This is a name I have never seen before. Philomath Nerd, ready and waiting. Blackleaf. I know Blackleaf. That is Uncivil Law, who says right here, Uncivil Law, what company? There we go. We got One Meal One Day. I remember seeing this name once upon a time. Hey, Uncivil Law, I have always wanted to see a lawyer, but I have extremely low... I've always wanted to be a lawyer, but I have extremely low self-esteem and depression, extreme lack of motivation. Do you do things that make you happier? I heard exercise and... anything that instills confidence, just learning a skill, but quitting porn. Okay, but first of all, incidentally, I didn't mean to disregard that as a joke. Just the last part was, how do you increase self-esteem and decrease anxiety? Did I see anxiety or did I just totally project that into it? Same answer. Exercise will decrease anxiety and increase self-esteem. Learning a skill will always increase self-esteem and creating a sense of worth. Once upon a time, when I had my own small law firm, and we were a small team, like 5 to 7, 7 at the biggest. I'm trying to think of when we had 7 all in all with the employees. We had my dad at one point, me, won't mention names, 3 lawyers, paralegal, and an assistant. And I was talking with one person, and I was saying, whether it's here or whether it's somewhere else, when you make yourself an integral part of a team, when you make yourself an invaluable part of that team, that is how you build self-esteem. You build worth. You build a sense of meaning, a sense of valor. And it's not something that can be built superficially with just, idle flattery or, you're good enough, you're doggone it, people love you. When you are an integral part of a team, that's where you really build this fundamental core sort of self-esteem, which is why not going to get into the political side of the quarantine, which is where you're going to, I imagine we're going to see lingering effects of lack of self-esteem, lack of self-worth, because people have now been relegated to pawns or inanimate objects in an overall scheme that doesn't involve their contributing to any organization. People now, their value is remaining at home in quarantine and not building something, and that's going to have lingering effects. But I appreciate the question was directed at Uncivil Law, who is a very smart person. He might even be smarter than me. I think he might be smarter than me. Being a lawyer has nothing to do with low self-esteem or depression. Life in general is going to have that same correlation. Depression is getting out, getting active, and being a part of something bigger than oneself. In my humble opinion, when Blackleaf is in here, he can do it. Someone says, okay, well, I won't get to that one. We got, why is Blue 923 taken? Because of you, why is Blue 923 taken? Got to pump those numbers up. Nah, I don't even care about that. Let's just do this. Honestly, though, walk. Yeah, go walk. There was someone said they were going to go exercise or watch this. Oh, Twitchy Smith says, oh, who heard that? My back is killing me because the first thing I do every morning, everyone says lift with your legs. The first thing I do is rush a paralyzed dog out of the house, and then I lean over, hunched over, tickle her like ovaries. Yeah, dogs have ovaries, but I tickle her bladder to get her to pee. Everything in my lower back kills. And I can't see an osteopath because that's how you get the CV, the My Sharona Cyrus. You can't have someone touching your body who's not your wife. And even if it's your wife, 2-meter pole, according to Canadian News. Rachel V, never seen this name. Rachael. I just can't hide it. Okay. We got Wide School. Viva, you went full Maher on your last post. So we're going to get into that last post. And it's an interesting thing. I don't think I went full Maher. I think it's a very interesting discussion. For those of you who don't know what I'm saying, my last video was breaking down Bill Maher's interview with Dan Crenshaw. And I knew at one point in that video, I knew I said something that might irritate or irk some people, that I disagreed with Dan Crenshaw substantively on an issue, whereas I agreed with Bill Maher substantively on an issue. One was Bill Maher's take on identifying the virus by its country of origin. I didn't disagree with Bill Maher, even though I don't like him. Dan Crenshaw, I like Dan Crenshaw from what I know of him, what I think I know of him, but I disagree with Dan Crenshaw on the background checks only for the purposes as related to his tweet on now people can't lend guns to friends. And I said, I disagree with that. I disagree with the idea of willy-nilly being allowed to lend a firearm to whomever you want because it's a property right. And I highlighted a response to one of my responses to a subscriber's or someone's comment, and I posted it in the community tab, and it led to a discussion. It led to a vehement. Let me just see where we're at now. It's as much as you can get ratioed on your own channel. Oh, that's my. I hear myself talking. Let me just close that down. It's as much as you can get ratioed in that there was a lot of activity on the question. More comments than thumbs up, which I don't care about. It's just an interesting thing. 194 thumbs up, whatever that, just so we can see here. Let's get that. Oh, there we go. But 351 comments, which means it's inciting more discussion than approval, which is very good, incidentally. Like, approval is nice, but I wouldn't say disapproval is better. Discussion is better. Ooh. Hey Siri, take a note.
What do you want it to say?
Approval is nice, comma, but discussion is better.
Okay, I created a note.
Thank you, Siri. So, and we'll talk about it, because the funny thing is, in the entire exchange in that comment section, Scott Adams says one screen, two films. I actually have a bit of a different idea. I see that it's two films, one screen. I genuinely think, by and large, we all agree on the most substantive issues. I would say 90% of us agree on 90% of the issues. I think the mental framework that we have is that we make divisive, deal-breaking matters of the 10% on which we don't agree. And so we can say, okay, like, we agree by and large in principle on 90%, but that on which we don't agree is that which separates us. And if you think about that, we'll get to it. It's an interesting thing, because I'm convinced about it. Even going through the comment section on that video, not on that video, what am I talking about? The comment section on the comment on that video, I think we agree on a lot of the stuff, substantively speaking. Tony Nieves says, Viva, what's your take on the recent Canada shooting as well as the Golden State? Okay, Golden State hot mic. Only indirectly I've heard about. I have no take on the Canada shooting. It's just terrible. I mean, the take. These issues get politicized and then they get sort of abstracted from the incident itself. The incident is a tragedy. My take, it's a tragedy. How people want to politicize it afterwards is a separate issue, which I don't really feel good about doing, or I don't really want to get involved in that. So let's see here. I think people's anger over Viva is just misplaced. Just get your own gun. If you're a felon, then you have consequences. If you don't break the law, then... So we're getting into it. We're getting ahead of it. But that's the interesting thing, is I say, like, my position is ownership is a Second Amendment right. The question is lending a Second Amendment right? Or is lending, it's your property, you should be able to do with it what you want, which is some of the comments. And just from this comment, it's like, yeah, if you are a felon, you can't get a gun. Okay, so we would agree then you can't lend your gun to a felon. We would agree with that, which is already agreeing on 90% of it. Certain restrictions on lending we can all agree on. It's just a question on the ones we can't agree on. But we agree in principle there could and should be certain restrictions on certain rights nonetheless. So we'll get there. We'll get there because I want to read through some of the comments, but I don't want to put them up because I don't want to put people on blast. I just want to address the substance, not the individuals. Maggie Smith, your Maher Crenshaw video was inspirational. Thank you. The funny thing about that video, halfway through shooting it in my car, I was about to stop recording because I didn't think I was psychologically happy with the way it was going. And halfway through editing it, I was going to give up and say, I'll just reshoot it on another day. But no, I went through it and it was good. It ended up, I once saw a meme, or it was like a flow chart, which says like every time you create a video, every time you create something, you go through the same sort of emotional pendulum where it's like, okay, I can do it. It sucks. I'll power through it. This is garbage. And then at the end, it's fantastic. And I never really think anything is fantastic that I do, but I just got through it and I published it and people like it. And it's just like you never know what is insightful anymore, what is repetitive, what is trivial, what is insulting. At some point, you sort of lose that own self-assessment or your ability to assess yourself through that framework, and it becomes practical, useful, and also crippling. But thank you very much, Maggie. And let's see what we say. When you cannot agree on fundamentals like whether abortion is child murder, it's tough to agree on much. Even that most fundamental one, I think there is a window of agreement. It's a very tricky thing. There is always a window, and it's not like in a negotiating or persuasion tactic thing. There's always a window where I think we fundamentally can agree on certain issues. But then but you get lost in that on which you can't agree, which makes you think you can't even agree on that which you can agree, because if you agree with something with someone who you agree with, what does it make for the stuff that you don't agree on? It's good. It's a confusing thing. Let me remind me to get to that in a second. L. Johnson. Let me just make sure I haven't missed anything. Crack my back again. Jeez Louise. Any thoughts on the USA halting immigration during the national emergency? Seems like there isn't really a current need for immigration. Canada halted it too, from what I understand. Safety, taking care of your own citizens before prioritizing other issues, which are noble and which are meaningful and which are important nonetheless. But there are bigger pressing issues for immediate issues for citizens. Canada did the same thing. So this is the funny thing. People are going to look at the US doing it and they're going to blame Trump. I think we can all agree that Trump and Trudeau are basically polar opposites in demeanor, in maybe not in substance, but just in public persona. They're basically polar opposites, and yet they engage in the same sort of activity. And watch how differently the same activity gets treated because of the perception of those individuals. But Canada's doing the same thing, from what I understand. Sergeant Frank Rock, your haircut looks awesome. How much did it cost? Hey, the only difference between a crappy haircut and a good haircut, this was a comment, is 2 weeks. It's been close to 2 weeks, so I still see a bit of a line there. And we got Furins Wolf 007. Viva, I still want my new shirt. Get going on it so I can buy it. Remind me of what it was. I think I remember now, but I do have a very short memory. Paul Hatcher, love your content. Thank you very much, Paul. And we've got Jim Keel. Has your family ever grown mushrooms? What kind of mushrooms? Oh, I missed Tabarouette. How did I miss? I missed a lot. Sergeant Rock. Viva, I want my new shirt. Love your content. Sorry, I missed things, and I'm not going to fall behind here. Randy T says, hey, Viva, lived in NDG years ago, now in Ottawa. Doing my best to get you on Matt Christensen's radar. Would love a cola. He's a very smart guy. Don't have to agree with him. Well-reasoned, well-researched, well-delivered. If you disagree with it, that has nothing to do with the person. I don't know the motivations of the person. I've seen a bunch of his stuff. I think I'm subscribed with all notifications turned on. Have not been unsubscribed unknowingly yet, but do it. I would be great. Drab1. Bugged you about this once. Can you look into George Pell, Australian Archbishop, media conspiracy or travesty of justice? Oh no, my Sharon. Let me just screenshot that. Boom. I'm screenshotting with my camera now. It'll be even easier. Ginger Ninja. One problem I think you might admit is that to enforce such a law, all firearms must be registered to each individual. So that's interesting. And as all history has shown, registration leads to future confiscation. I followed the firearm safety course in Canada. That was one of the things that I noticed is it's more of a liability to own a firearm in Canada than a protection, because government knows you have it. The gun store knows you have it. The employees of that store know you have it. Anybody who hacks that store knows you have it. You become a target for theft and government confiscation. You're right. Flip side, if there were civil remedies, like, before drones had to be registered, if you were to loan your drone to somebody and they were to fly it over downtown and crash it, you as the owner, in theory, could be held liable for having loaned it to whomever. Same thing with cars. If you loan your car to somebody and it's a poorly maintained car and they crash it, there's all sorts of civil remedies. So registration is not necessarily the only remedy to that, but we're going to get Uncivil Law who's going to talk with us about that. Registration is the immediate, obvious sort of method of dealing with it, but not the only one. Thank you very much, by the way, Ginger. And if I missed anybody's super chat, you'll let me know. We got Jim Keel says, your favorite ever grow mushrooms? That we got. Okay, that I was at before. Don Lopez. Why should felons be denied certain rights but not others? Seems to me that any citizen not in prison should have all of their rights restored. You know what? Let's bring Uncivil Law. No, I see him walking away. I'll get him in a second when he comes back. These are more fundamental issues. More fundamental issues for discussion, but you're already sort of dealing with things that are current law. And these are fundamental issues. But to the extent that some people say, well, obviously you can't lend your firearm to a convicted felon. Okay, well, then we all agree on some restrictions, but which ones? Unless someone says you can lend it to anybody, a 10-year-old kid. But then it's like, oh, well, that's a facetious argument. Someone said that in the comment section. So you can't lend it to a 10-year-old kid. Okay, well, we can agree on that restriction of lending. So you see, like, we can agree in principle. It's just, it's the extent to which anybody wants to go. Unless someone says, you can lend your gun to a 10-year-old. And that would be interesting. Or you can lend a drone, or you can lend your car to somebody who doesn't know how to drive. Except the Second Amendment arguments that driving a car is not a Second Amendment right, as is bearing arms. That's the distinction. Okay, let's see what we got here. Arnicker says you should listen to Dan Crenshaw audiobook. Decide to get it after your video, and not knowing much about him. Thoughts are so well. I've been seeing a bunch of comments saying I need to see Dan Crenshaw get owned by Joe Rogan, which I'm gonna go watch. I have not seen it yet, but I've been looking. I saw the link. I just have not been able to watch it. Okay, after I'm going to get a few of these. I'm going to get everybody's super chat, and then I'm going to get into bringing in the discussion. Have you looked into the U.S. Congress, Devin Nunes, multiple lawsuits against various journalists? No. I looked into Nunes' lawsuit against Twitter, did a video on it. I'll look into that. I got nothing but time now. But the other thing is some of these lawsuits get repetitive in substance, but not in detail. So, like, the questions are the same. Someone just said, am I going to look into, I forget which state it is now that's suing China. I said, I'm going to look into it, but if the lawsuit is by and large the same as the class action lawsuit against China that I've already done a video on, I'm not going to just repeat it for the sake of repeating it. We got default username. Why do my property rights end if I decide to lend my property to another private citizen? Where do their property rights begin? Love your content. Thank you very much. The one example I'm thinking of is, okay, your property rights. You own prescription medication. Can you lend it to anybody? And if you say I can lend it to anybody, do you get to lend it to anybody with impunity? And then it's going to be a distinction on the type of property, but private property ownership does not necessarily entail private property transfer rights or lending rights. And if you do lend prescription medication to somebody and they overdose, or you lend prescription medication to someone who doesn't know how to use it, or you lend something to someone who's not authorized to use it. I understand there's a distinction with firearms versus all these other things because cars are regulated by license and firearms are Second Amendment rights. The issue is we could easily imagine private property on which there should be restrictions on lending. Someone in the comment section of my comment said, well, you don't lend someone medication because they consume it. I don't think consumption is the distinction between lending property and not. I think it's not at all. But the idea is it's your property. Ownership is different than lending. And if someone says you can own what you want, but you just can't necessarily lend everything that you own to anybody because there can be certain repercussions, I think we can agree in substance. We just don't agree on the details. Maximum Bacon. Love the Law Dog hoodie. Keep up the great work with the great attitude, my bud. Thank you very much, by the way. And I see holy cows. Mackers, would you do a vlog on the DNC fraud lawsuit? Screenshotting it right now. I think I looked into it at one point, but it became no longer relevant. But I'm going to look into it. Viva, you're second only to Red Green show for Canadian content. Red Green. For anybody who doesn't know what Red Green is, you have to Google Red Green to get the joke. Thank you, Derek. Okay, and I'm going to do these. I'm going to get these. I'm going to bring in. Oh my goodness. Okay, we got second only to red green. Jedi Ghostbuster IIRC. Canada has voter ID laws. The U.S. doesn't. I think every country on Earth except for the U.S. has voter ID laws, unless I'm mistaken. Maybe I'm exaggerating. I think a great many countries on Earth have voter ID laws, and when you consider that when you consider what ID laws you have, even in the States, it becomes a very interesting subject of discussion. Okay, we got Lynn Washington. Dan Lopez has a good point. One that needs to be discussed. There won't be consensus, but the chat would be fun. Dan Lopez, I need to remember what that comment was, but I will get to it if it comes back up. Have you ever watched Eric Weinstein and James O'Keefe interview? I don't think so. Insight of the Ages. I love seeing new comments and new names come up because I know I have a pretty good memory for icons and names. Just can't put the two together. Gregorius Anomalous says, Maher did invite Crenshaw to appear on his show. Do you believe he meant it? Why no more Vlog Dog shirts on your merch site? They should be there. I think there might be issues with the merch site, but I'm worrying less about merch now and just worrying about getting content out. I don't think I'm not pushing merch hard because of the time that we're going through. And I don't even know if, honestly, I don't even know if they're still delivering, but I'm not pushing the merch hard because I'm just want to push the content and get stuff for people to watch and make sure the community is not going crazy, which I suspect a lot of people are at this point. It's been 7 weeks, going on 8 weeks now in Canada. Why are you pro-gun control? Do you want buybacks? Pro-gun, that's a loaded question. What does pro-gun control mean? You have to define your term. I think people should have the right to own a firearm. Which ones? How many? What aspects? What should they be able to do with them? So I won't call this a loaded question, but this question presupposes terms which define the question and make it very difficult to answer. Do I want buybacks? That the buybacks presupposes that the government comes in and outlaws a weapon that was hitherto legal. That is part and parcel of the risk of having to register a weapon, especially in Canada. We've seen it. Buybacks. Do I want buybacks? Then it depends. It depends on it depends. But bearing in mind, pro-gun control would mean absent gun control. The flip side. I think everybody can agree on certain amounts of gun control. That 10-year-olds can't go in and buy a gun. That's gun control. That's the thing. Is like people throw around terms which mean something which they have defined as meaning something, but which don't have necessarily the same meanings to everybody else. Everybody can agree on certain elements of gun control. 10-year-old minors should not be able to buy guns. That's gun control. So everybody agrees on it in concept. It's just on how it materializes where people start to disagree. Jim Stella says U.S. gun control for 200 years, zero gun control. I don't know. Let's get Blackleaf into or Uncivil to argue whether or not there has been zero gun control, because I suspect minors have not been allowed to buy weapons, which is gun control. And I hope I'm not oversimplifying this to an absurdity. There has been gun control. There just hasn't been what there is today. And what it is today is much different than I suspect than what it was. 1968 GCA made it illegal for felons mainly because of Black Panthers based on racism, segregation, era bigotry. We'll get Uncivil on to talk about this, actually. I think we might have to do it sooner or later. I wanted to talk about the Bill Maher, but maybe it's not the relevant element to discuss for tonight. James Goodman says, Nunes is using an attorney who is named in newly proposed legislation that would bring anti-SLAPP to Virginia. Nunes is using or suing. That might have been a typo, or that might have been what you meant to say, Jason. Is using an attorney who is named. Oh, he's using an attorney who is named in newly proposed legislation. Okay, very interesting. It's interesting. Who's the new member? New member is Steal Your Mind. Let's see what we got. Where did he come in? Where did he come in? Hold on. I lost a color here. Where was I at? Okay, we got this. We got Goodman. That's where we were at. Now we go with a lot of comments. Holy cows. Okay, so I've lost control of the comment section. I'm not following it. Just want to say hi, loved your sail race. Thanks. The snail race, that was phenomenal. We raced snails on my second channel, Viva Random, which anybody who's interested. Hi from Calgary, Alberta. Really love your content. Thank you very much, Beth Dugout. Here we go. Steal Your Mind, new member. You know what? It might be time to bring in. Okay, not suing the attorney. So he's using the attorney. Okay, he is using. Okay, it's good to know. Okay, let's bring him in. Kurt, you ready? If I'm bringing you in, let me just see. If you not blink twice, if I can bring you in. One. No, I said blink, not thumbs up. Okay.
How you doing? It's good to talk to you.
How you doing?
Doing fine, man. It's good times.
Okay, good. Well, so you're going to correct me if I'm wrong on certain things, and I'm going to forgive me for interrupting in advance because I want to get to the super chats and I want to get to questions.
Sure.
Even if I'm missing chats, that would be a first. In fact, now that Kurt is in here, I know that we don't have a moderator.
Well, for what it's worth, in streams where I've been trying to moderate and help you with super chats, I'll be like at Viva trying to like give you the thing you missed, but you don't pay attention to what I'm telling you in the chat. I've been trying to feed you these things on the super chats you miss, and you're never paying attention to what I'm feeding you. So it's not really working out. No,
but maybe at Viva does not come up highlighted in.
It probably does. I don't know if it comes up in StreamYard. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Well, Long Reach Jones says Australia has moderate to heavy gun control. It is still possible in rural areas to take a pack of 10 to 13-year-olds for hunting lessons. Okay, so you know what? Let's first of all, Kurt, did you see my comment in the community tab?
Yes.
Okay, and I'm going to bring up some of the comments. My phone is going to go dead because it's like down to 2%. But so here's the issue. I mean, is it first of all, did you see my Dan Crenshaw?
I did. Yes.
And what did you think?
Well, I thought generally that he did a very good job responding to Maher, who had these points, and he came back with like, no, if you actually look at the real timeline and the real thing, you're not discussing a whole bunch of stuff. But yeah, I did like what you said about him using these leading questions or loaded questions and multiple premise questions. I really liked how Dan Crenshaw answered all that. I thought he did a really good job by having all stuff together. And it was really good that the audience wasn't there, because he was able to respond in an effective way that he wouldn't have been able to do if the audience were there. So Bill lost that advantage, and it really showed. So I thought that was a really good takeaway.
There was one thing I totally forgot to mention in that video, which was one of the other techniques used in crappy arguing or like silly debating, which was, it surprises me that, or it's sort of like the shame argument that goes into how can someone like you who's
yeah. But
it's like
exactly it's like it's an implicit character attack too. Like, you've been in Fallujah, how could you possibly do this? And I thought he did a really good job, answering those questions. And if you look at the whole timeline and you look at what other countries are doing, then Maher comes back with, well, since when have we been following Italy or Spain? Well, when they are the countries that are front loaded with respect to the issue that we're trying to deal with, looking to how they've behaved is kind of relevant. So this whole point was weird.
It was also the moral argument, like it was the moral superiority, like the USA leads the world. Why would we listen to these other nations? And then the flip side is when this is confirmation bias by definition. It's like, if you don't listen to the other nations, how dare you defy the rest of the world? So there's no winning when you come into it with
there is no winning. There's absolutely no winning. And I think that was proven most definitively with, as Crenshaw himself pointed out, on the 31st of what was it, of January, when he put in the travel ban. Trump put in the travel ban. It was the same day that Nancy Pelosi put in the No Ban Act as a proposal to limit Trump's authority. Right. So the very same day he puts in this travel ban, Nancy Pelosi is trying to prohibit it from happening. Fast forward to today, the Democrats are, if anything, saying that Trump was too soft. Biden released a commercial arguing that Trump facilitated China by not being harsh enough on them. He should have been more harsh. I'm like, well, if you look at what you were trying to do, you're trying to prevent him from banning people. So this after the fact, trying to pretend like, oh, we only wish we had been harder. He wasn't hard enough on China. Yeah, that's definitely in keeping with what you said earlier. So this revisionist history is very annoying.
No, and it's an amazing thing. It's where Bill Maher says, since when do we take the lead from Italy and Spain? Oh, and then the flip side, literally, when the USA doesn't follow the lead of the rest of the world.
Yeah.
Why aren't they? How dare he defy the rest of the world? The WHO says this, and
the international community. Yeah, exactly right. You can't win no matter what you do. You can't win no matter what you do.
And
Yeah.
he did amazingly well. There's factual issues. Like people were saying, some of the comments, because I read all of them, they were saying you're taking as gospel what Crenshaw said. And I say, I'm not necessarily taking as gospel what Crenshaw said, but acknowledge the disputed fact and don't try to override the disputed fact just by getting the last word and moving on. So like
the other place where it's been really apparent to me is all the times the Democrats have been saying that Trump should invoke the National Production Act. He should exert more authority. He should be more controlling. And then when he does stuff, he says, well, Trump has become an authoritarian. I was like, I thought that's what you wanted. I thought you wanted him to be authoritarian. It's like, which way do you want it? You want him to use this National Production Act, which allows him to go into any business and force them to sign a contract that makes them produce any product he wants and give them priority. So like, okay, you want him to be able to do that, but when he says other things, it's like, well, he doesn't have the authority to do this. It's like, well, which do you want? You know, you want this dictatorial leader or not? I don't know.
Okay, now, incidentally, for anybody who doesn't know, Kurt, I'm not disclosing any confidential information because we've talked about it on previous vlogs. Kurt is kind of up to speed on his gun laws and knowledge.
Yes.
Somewhat. I mean, I think we had a discussion for like an hour after one of our streams about details that I never even knew existed. And so
yeah, I'm not as sharp as I used to be, but I definitely have served as legal advisors to a couple different gun groups, and so I'm pretty familiar with the overall gun law picture in the United States.
Okay, so we got Jim Satala says, I was referring to U.S. federal law, no age restrictions either prior to 1968. Shooting hunting was taught in public schools prior to 1968.
I don't know whether or not the shooting thing is in high schools was related to 1968, so that I don't know about. But he's certainly right that shooting was taught a lot more in schools in the past. For example, Justice Scalia, when he was a high school student, used to take a .22 rifle on the subway in New York to go to high school to shoot with because he was part of the shooting team when he was in high school. So, you know, that period of history, that was a thing that's happening. And the idea of a person taking a rifle on the subway today to go to school for shooting activity in New York City, not so much, right? There are definitely are schools that still have shooting clubs today, but they are much less common. And I think to some degree, like the NRA and other groups have been trying to bring that back a little bit to some effect, but there are definitely schools that have it, but it's much less than it used to be.
Well, I was going to say, and also carrying a weapon, depending on how it's carried, if it's disassembled in a locked case, like in Canada, we see it not too often, but you see it. It looks like a fishing rod case, in which case you never really know if it's a fishing rod, a fly fishing rod, or a rifle.
Yeah,
but
that's right.
If it's in a locked case, and you sort of can take for granted that it's sort of not immobilized, but rather, it's not as accessible, even if you know what the person is carrying. We got not a banned account says, do you favor red flag laws, ERPO, and semi-auto ban? Kurt, what do you mean? You want to dissect
emergency protection orders and some? Well, no, I. Okay, so the red flag laws, there's a serious due process issue, and there's also a issue with people making false claims and how those are addressed. So, one of the things you might be concerned about if you were looking to write these laws, one of the things you'd be concerned about is someone making a false claim, and the people seizing firearms with someone, and it taking some period of time to. Assuming you're doing all the due process after the fact, which presumably you are in the emergency protective order, some time to get into court to get your rights back, and what penalties are, if any, are going to be attached to the person if they can be shown to make a blatantly false claim, for example. So like a lot of these red flag laws that are being written don't have sufficient protections in that regard. They don't have sufficient protections in terms of you being able to get before a judge quickly enough, and they don't have sufficient protections in terms of providing a disincentive to the person who's making a report if it can be shown to be false, frivolous, malicious kind of report, so that someone who just doesn't like you can just make a report against you. So there's some serious due process concerns in that regard. If it were up to me and I were going to write this, I'd be saying, yeah, first of all, you have to get in front of a judge in like a fixed time window, maybe 72 hours or something. And second of all, if like it can be shown to be frivolous, whatever, then you can get some sort of statutory damages will put into the law, so that you can get damages from the other person for making this frivolous claim. So that might be, and then you can spend the $10,000 that you get, to buy more guns, which, It's something at the end of the day if it's shown to be frivolous, so we can provide some back end. So that's how I'd write it if I were interested in writing it.
And incidentally, as a lawyer, in the early days of my law career at the big firm I used to work at, we did these things called motions for confinement, which, they're basically red flag laws, except for humans. You don't have to have a gun in order for this red flag, to invoke this red flag law. You have to have an imminent threat to self or others. And I saw cases where they were needed, and I saw a great many cases where they were unjustified. And then I was the lawyer arguing in front of the judge why an individual who was an otherwise free, they might not have been all there. They might have had a different mental framework than 99% of the other people, but they were not necessarily an imminent threat to themselves or others. And you had to make an argument in front of a judge why they should be locked up against their will. And you could see the cases, the cases where it was obvious, it was obvious. The cases where it wasn't obvious, you have to justify how you can restrict someone's individual liberty. And the cases where it was clearly, obviously not warranted, you still had to argue it. And then at one point I said, I'm never doing it again because I don't want to. I saw cases where there was no question, not a risk to self or other. And yet you were trying to invoke this sort of red flag law to lock the person up in an institution for 48 hours prior to reassessment by a doctor who would decide whether or not they get whether they get locked in even more. And once you're in, the doctors can do whatever they want.
Right. So looking to these kind of mental hygiene laws is a reasonably good analog, because if you're concerned about putting someone into a mental health facility on a non-voluntary basis for some sort of period, for urgent observation, whatever that might be, 24, 48, 72 hours, whatever it might be, right? So that's a reasonable analog, because in that case, you're being deprived of another essential liberty, your physical liberty, your physical freedom of movement, all kinds of stuff are implied by that. Now, some of that stuff, when it comes to the mental hygiene laws that are on the books, such as they are, and I think if anything, we could look to bring that out, because I think mental health is a big problem, and we need mechanisms to deal with mental health issues. A lot of firearms issues are actually mental health issues. So we can look to deal with that in a mental health environment. But a lot of those require a medical doctor, as a person who's going to sign it. So this is a person who's competent to reach a decision and also putting their own license on the line in addition to whatever penalties there might be. So there's something there to deal with that. And of course, again, even in those cases, you have the right to get before a judge, you have a right to process, you have the right to things. And if it's shown to be malicious, you can go after the doctor's license because they're a professional who signed it. So there's that disincentive there, right? So in the mental hygiene environment, where you're being deprived of your ability to have liberty of movement for some period of time, we have those kinds of things. So if we want to bring that into the red flag law environment, that's fine. The red flag laws normally are written to allow a person, well, it depends on the state. Sometimes it's anyone, sometimes it's someone who's like in some sort of physical proximity to the person or familial proximity. So it can be like the person's father, the person's son, or a person who lives in the same house, or a person at the same work environment, which depending on where you work, that could be a lot of different people, but there's usually some kind of proximity environment, but not always. But the problem is you're dealing with untrained people, right? So if for example, in some of these red flags laws, it's like anyone at work can say, I know this person's a gun owner and I think they're a threat and I'm going to go report on them. So like if you work in like a building with 1,000 people, that's any one of 1,000 people who's untrained, who says, oh, this person's a threat. So it's distinct from the mental health environment where it had to be a trained doctor. So I'm like, okay, so this person doesn't have any training. I can't go after their license so they don't have one. So like, well, how can I fix the same sort? How can I balance this on the backside? So where I balance it against the doctor by like, I'll go after your license, I'll file professional complaints, that kind of thing. It's like, well, I can balance it against the individual by saying, if I prove this to be frivolous, if I prove this to be malicious, if I prove it to be baseless, then I'm going to get statutory damages of insert some figure here that's going to, provide enough disincentive and allow me to buy, enough firearms and ammo to make it all better again. So there's ways to balance it out, and it's not unprecedented in terms of constitutional right arguments.
Are there any, I have no idea, are there any states with red flag laws that are purely anonymous? Someone calls in a hotline and says, X person living at Y address is a threat, go get him.
I don't know the answer to that question because I don't know all the red flags everywhere. I read the ones in California, which are pretty broad. I read the ones but I don't know if there's anyone where it's purely anonymous. But like, again, even like in a purely anonymous tip, Like the problem, like you can always have anonymous informants. You can always have someone who gets on a phone, you know, the classic drop a dime, where the phrase came from, right? The phrase drop a dime came literally from a time when payphones were 10 cents to call a phone, to use the payphone. So we're going way back when there were payphones and they cost 10 cents. That's where drop a dime came from. So you would go to a payphone, pay 10 cents to call the police and say, oh, I see this happening to so forth and so on, right? It's completely anonymously. So there's that problem too. But like, yeah, we need to put some sort of real due process protections in here, because we are talking about a actual constitutional right, an actual constitutional liberty, where that's freedom of movement, freedom of autonomy in the case of mental health, or these red flag laws, right of ownership. So there's some serious constitutional law balancing that needs to be done, and we need to provide some disincentives to prevent this from just becoming a mechanism to harass people we don't like.
Totally. I mean, I tend to agree with it, and having seen the way it works with mental health.
And JD says, "What's a payphone?" Yeah, this whole discussion is a little mooted. Yes.
All Metal Mike says, "Why does no one attack the interviewers like Trump does, Maher, Maher, or White House press corps, saying why would you ask a dumb question like that?" Well, so Nate Brody did a video on it where we actually did diverging takes on the reporter harassing Trump on with the dumb question about. I forget the question now, but we basically said, like, you know what I said, it's a loaded question, it's a silly question, and it's undignified almost. Nate says, oh, it's a typical question, you expect that question, and Trump should answer it. Bottom line, he does answer the question. I mean, everybody sort of deals with dumb questions in their own way, and Trump deals with it in his way, and Dan Crenshaw dealt with it in his way. The only question is, which is more effective, you know, to the viewer, and which one is more effective on the substance. But you know, they all deal with it. Everyone deals with it in a different way. Some people answer the question and demean the reporter, others berate the reporter. It's
yeah.
Let me see here. I did see one other super chat that I don't want to lose, because I'm going to lose it, and I believe I already lost it. There's two. Son of a bee sting. Okay, I saw a blue one. Now, someone tell me if I missed this. We got Bill Clark. Thank you very much. That was not the one I was looking for. Hold on one second. Not the one that was saved. That is another one. We got Dapper Dave. How is this different than obtaining a restraining order for a DV, domestic violence? Gets issued with very little evidence, should be expanded for with mental health, possession of weapons. I mean, you want to field this, Kurt?
Well, I think it presents similar problems, particularly if you're living in the same household, right? So, like, if you're separated from your partner, it doesn't present quite the same problems, because the restrictions are less onerous, right? So, like, if you physically live in a different environment, like, keep 500 feet away from your person while we're adjudicating this is one thing. But if you live in the same household, it presents the same issues. And again, if anything, we would want to look to ways to increase the due process issues, because we're getting emergency. But even then, it's like being issued by a judge with some testimony and something, and someone has to go on the record, and like, so there's something. Now, personally, I don't think it's sufficient, but there's something there to try to deal with those issues. And I think you can make a better than credible case it's not sufficient, which is, again, one of the reasons to be cautious about the red flag laws. Yeah, and it gives judges too much. You don't want one of the other things is, like, even if it's being issued by a judge, you know, there's quite a lot of judges out there who, in the case of domestic violence, you know, might be very, you know, because we're dealing on a spectrum and a bell curve. So there's judges out there who will issue these things without really reading them. There are judges out there who are extremely anti-gun and will issue them. So just because a judge is issuing that doesn't necessarily give enough protections.
Well, and I was even with the temporary restraining orders, there is a hearing date. Even if there's an emergency ex parte being without the parties there, you still have your hearing as quickly thereafter as possible, as opposed to totally no hearing whatsoever and just, you know, administrative people rendering decisions. I'm not reading this person's name because I cannot figure out. Spare the cat. I don't know. Sure, let's go with that. Good work. Okay, so, you know, let me just see if I got. This is absolutely. But this is the issue. Is, like, we can't oversimplify with these types of. Agreed. And I've had many vehicles. I've never run a person over. The issue is when people use them for the wrong reasons. The question is. Okay, now, and Kurt, you'll answer me this one, because I wasn't sure, and I got diverging answers. Second Amendment rights, does it include the right to lend a firearm that you are allowed to possess under the Second Amendment?
Okay, well, let me answer this in terms of the current case law, what the current state of the law is, rather than what it should be, right? So
Yeah.
the current state of the law, no, because the courts that have been analyzing these restrictions have been almost universally applying intermediate scrutiny, which is a pretty easy standard to meet when you're talking about guns, because you need just a substantial governmental interest, which is pretty easy when it comes to guns. Like, we don't want people to die, and guns kill people and stuff. And you just need something that is, essentially reasonably related to the purpose, which is also fairly easy. So most of the restrictions from the appeal courts have been upheld. But what I think what we need to do is we need to lay out some foundational cases. So Heller and McDonald set out the foundational right to keep case, right? So they stand for the proposition that you have a right to have a handgun in an operative condition in your home. It's a narrow ruling, but it's a foundational ruling, and it's the way to do this. It's a very one step at a time. So, like, what the gun rights community needs right now is the foundational right to bear case. We need a case from the Supreme Court that says you have a right to bear a gun of some kind in some circumstance, whatever, and you want to build this up. Like, the First Amendment as we know it exists today did not come in overnight. There's, depending on how you're counting, 70, 80 years worth of First Amendment case law, case after case after case after case, building it up, right? And so, like, you need, like, one step at a time. So a lot of gun owners will be like, well, I have a right to machine gun. And I heard people at the time, because I knew Alan Gurr at the time, the guy who argued Heller. I knew that attorney, and I knew when he was working on that case. I didn't help him in the case, but I knew him, and we had conversations. And a lot of people were putting him pressure to argue about machine guns in Heller. And he said no, and I thought that was absolutely correct. I'm like, you're absolutely insane. You can't go into the U.S. Supreme Court and say I have a right to own a machine gun. The decision was 5-4 as it was. You can't argue for too much. You have to do this one step at a time. So, like, how about a handgun by a lawful citizen in their own home? So we're keeping this very constrained. And even that was 5-4, which shows all the more that I thought he was right. A lot of people gave him crap for not arguing about machine guns, and he said no. And I'm like, of course you can't. So what we need is a right to bear case. So NYSRPA, which versus New York, was the case that was supposed to do that this term in the Supreme Court. So New York City had a regulation that essentially prevented people from taking their gun from one residence to another, from taking it from a place of business to a shooting range, and a whole bunch of restrictions, right? The U.S. Supreme Court granted certiorari, and New York City basically mooted the issue. They ran off to the state capitol, got a law passed to basically undo the whole thing. And the Supreme Court hasn't issued its ruling yet on that case, but I'm pretty sure they're going to say it's mooted, which is really annoying, because it was going to be a foundation. It's going to be a right to bear case, because it's, taking a gun outside the home for some purpose of some variety. So that could have been a foundational right to bear case that's been taken away from us. So that's really, really annoying. So I don't know what the right to bear case is, but every time it's ever gotten close to the U.S. Supreme Court, like when Chicago lost the concealed carry permit issue, because Illinois used to have no issue permits. That issue got by 7th Circuit Court of Appeals, said, yes, you should have permits. And Illinois didn't take it to the U.S. Supreme Court because they didn't want the precedent. Same thing happened in D.C. D.C. had no issue permits. They wouldn't issue permits. D.C. lost in the D.C. Court of Appeals. D.C. didn't appeal it because they didn't want the case before the U.S. Supreme Court. And in NYSRPA, the New York State couldn't make the decision because they had won. But what they did was they tried to undo it by mooting the issue, and I think it's going to be successful. And in, like, Peruta, the 9th Circuit Court of Appeals basically tried to keep it away. So everyone's been trying to keep the right to bear case away from the U.S. Supreme Court. So hopefully at some point they'll take it so we can build foundations and have case law on top of case law. So the question you started with is, do you have a right to transfer a case? That case is like 4 cases away from NYSRPA. We're nowhere close to that right now under the case law. So right now under the case law, the answer is no. And if you want the answer to be yes, well, It's going to be a while because we have a hard time getting anything before the Supreme Court. So that's where we are.
It's very interesting. And now, before we go on, I'm going to do this. I'm going to go. Daryl Sellers says, Roger Stone's sentencing opinion. Do you think he'll report to prison or he will receive a pardon in the next couple of weeks? He will. It's inevitable that he receives a pardon. I read through the Judge Amy Jackson's decision dismissing or not granting him a new trial. It's just so long and dense and almost incomprehensible and unable to be broken down into a comprehensible fashion. But it was mental gymnastics to deny him a new trial, and I think he'll get pardoned. It's just the political play that had to happen. She had to do that so that Trump now says, I have no choice but to pardon him because it was such an injustice.
Someone in the chat asked me what I meant by mooted. It's M-O-O-T, moot. It just means that something is no longer a subject for discussion, at least in American English. In UK, it means exactly the opposite. But in American English, it means that a subject is no longer
material.
Debate. So it's pointless. It's a pointless debate. So yeah, the issue is no longer ripe.
The other term is academic. It's become
academic. Yes, academic is the way to put it.
It's without object.
Yeah.
Kurt and Viva, I missed you both. I'll wait for the upload to stay tuned for the rest. That was thanks. Keep rested and keep us all sane. See sexy trois. Thank you very much.
Yes.
Let's see what we got here now. I know I missed a couple more because I saw them come through. Let me just go to See Sexy. I got Bobcat, which I'm coming to. See Sexy. Okay, so I'm missing a lot of the chat, but I'll get this super chat just because it's highlighted. Bobcat, given the computer code and hardware is sometimes regulated under ITAR, would it follow that they would be protected under the Second Amendment?
Good question, actually. I'm going to say no, because when you're talking first of all, ITAR is the treaty that deals with its international trade of arms. I don't know if it's a treaty. It's a law in the United States that prevents people from exporting weapons. Okay. And munitions. All right. And computer code has been defined in this. In fact, at one point, I don't know if this is still true. I'm doubtful, but some version of the PlayStation, maybe it was the PlayStation 3, when it first came out, its computational power was so high, it was classified under ITAR as an arms munition, as a weapon, because its computational power was so high. So you couldn't export it to Iran or something. So yeah, I don't know if that's still true, but that was true at the time. Anyways, but yeah, no, because the Second Amendment, whatever arms, well, okay, in my view as an originalist, right? So when I look at these things, I look at them in originalist language. So whatever arms means in the Second Amendment is what it meant in 1791. And whatever that might be does not include computer code. But the Constitution sets a floor, not a ceiling. So the Congress can always do more than the Constitution allows, as long as it's in the right direction. So you at best would make a First Amendment argument, freedom of speech, not a Second Amendment argument, because computer code is language. So you could make a First Amendment argument, but not second. It's not within the scope of ARM in the meaning of Second Amendment. But can Congress fold it into ITAR? Sure, but it's not Second Amendment. No, but nice try.
All right, and we got Solitary Gamer says, didn't South Carolina
the Supreme Court
in common use?
Yes.
Okay. Wouldn't that include handguns, the most prevalent type of firearms, and semi-autos?
Yes, it did explicitly. That was the entire point of Heller. Yes. So in Heller and McDonald's, they talked about the arms that were in common use or conventional. And yes, it does include handguns, which was the entire point of that decision, that the handguns are in common use for normal, routine, lawful purposes. So yes, it does. Yes.
Okay. Tony Neff says the founding fathers 100% would have tanked jousted. Okay, and we got Nope, who I just saw here.
Maybe.
Police in some NJ, New Jersey, appear to be enforcing social distancing in backyards using drones from DJI drones. Lord knows where they relay the information, but from a moral perspective, I should have the right to shoot it down any legal basis. Oops, hold on. Joking. Of course, sort of.
I think it might be a Fourth Amendment violation, to be quite honest.
Forget that. How are you supposed to know that it's a police drone? What's that too? Are there lights on it? If I see a drone,
probably.
If I have the ability, I would get my Hawk with its leather cable to take it down. But we don't have the same firearms in Canada. But if I see a drone, my first suspicion is not that it's a police drone spying on me. It's that it's some stupid ass neighbor, and I will throw a hockey puck at it if I have to.
So on the Fourth Amendment law, the curtilage of a home, which doesn't have a precise physical definition, but it's the land immediately outside a home. So I'll give you as opposed to open fields. So the easiest way to illustrate this example is if you have a little home on the prairie style, and your home is on a multi-acre farm, right? The Fourth Amendment protections are different in the home versus in the open field. So the open fields do not have the same Fourth Amendment protection, but there is some area immediately outside the home called the curtilage of a home, which does have Fourth Amendment protections. So there is some area immediately outside the home that's treated as being in the home for Fourth Amendment purposes. And, in your typical New Jersey land, in your typical yard, I would argue your typical backyard is part of curtilage. So I think it raises Fourth Amendment problems. So you have a civil rights complaint there, my friend. Go forth.
To me, it's mind blowing, but it's mind blowing. I mean, I don't believe that we're using drones in Canada yet. We just are using the government downloaded app that people are willingly downloading. Daniel Silva says, which amendment is being trampled on more, first or second? I think it's first.
Depends on your philosophical, but I'd say second, just because there's so little case law on it. I mean, at the U.S. Supreme Court level, there's essentially Heller and McDonald, and also U.S. versus Miller from 1939, which is kind of a garbage case just because it's a complete muddled mess. Whereas in First Amendment law, they do like 3 to 4 First Amendment cases every year. There's like 250 years worth of case law or 250 cases worth of case law on First Amendment. So I think the Second Amendment is just being trampled more, not for at least the reasons that like the First Amendment has all kinds of levels of scrutiny for all kinds of speech, and some is treated at different levels, and strict, intermediate, all the rest. And right now, the Second Amendment, like everything's intermediate scrutiny. So that can't be right. Well, but that's what the Court of Appeals are doing. So until the U.S. Supreme Court stops them, well, that's the legal reality. So yeah.
I would say from a Canadian perspective, I see more of the First Amendment rights being trampled on in the States.
Well, in Canada, yeah, you don't have a First Amendment. You guys suck.
We have a constitution, but it has neither.
Do you though?
Do we? Does anybody have inalienable rights? I think we learned from Robert Barnes we may have them, but they might be alienable, easily alienable.
Weren't you guys had that video that you guys were talking about new legislation to deal with false speech or some crap?
It hasn't come out yet. No, but who needs that? We have our human rights tribunals that outlaw offensive jokes.
They've tried that in the U.S. No, you can't do that here. No, we have more freedom of speech than you do. It's nice.
That much is undeniable. Federal offense to shoot down an aircraft. Drones have been classified as an aircraft. Yeah, but there was a case in the States where there was a neighbor flying a drone over the property. The guy shot it down with a shotgun and faced no charges. So I mean, I don't know if there's case law that would have otherwise been useful for that case, but okay, hold on. I just lost something here.
You actually have to get into the definitions of all these things. So yes, like the FAA does regulate drones, but that doesn't necessarily mean the statutes dealing with like shooting down aircraft necessarily apply to drones, because you'd actually have to look at the relevant statute and how it's defined in that terms and blah 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 blah. Yeah, so yeah, good times.
No, and also if the aircraft is hovering around your house, maybe to spy on your house, maybe the circumstances change. Stephanie Mata says FYI encryption equals munitions since World War II.
Yes, for your information, yes. So the same thing, like computer code. So he's saying that encryption has been treated as munitions. Yes, that's absolutely true. It absolutely was treated as munitions. And for the same reason PS3, I think it was treated as munitions because it was a sufficient code breaker because of the computational power. But yes, since they invented encryption, it was. I remember some of the stuff dealing with the encryption debates in the 90s where this was coming up too in exportation. I remember when Phil Zimmerman was being harassed because of this when he was coming out with PGP. So yeah, these are not new problems. Yes.
Okay, now Jason McConnell, I'm going to read the first half of the super chat, but not the second half. Jason McConnell says Canada doesn't need drones. Trudeau just, and we can read the rest of it, people. Thank you for the super chat, but
Are you sure that's not Ralph Northam?
Hey, we have the same problems in Canada and the U.S. It's just that we have 1/10 of them that you have in the U.S. Mm-hmm. Thank you, Jason, by the way. And
is that a joke on your population size?
Yes, it was. Our population.
I picked up on that. I picked it up when you're laying down. I got it. That's fine.
Okay, we got Jim Stella says, bottom line, Trump re-election, 2 more Supreme Court picks, Second Amendment. We'll see where it goes.
Yeah, if RBG should, for one reason or another, not be on the bench anymore, then Trump would be insane to nominate anyone other than Amy Coney Barrett from the Seventh Circuit. So if she happens to lead the bench, then Amy Coney Barrett, he would be insane not to name anyone else. And she is more conservative than Thomas, which I didn't think was possible. But yeah, she'll give him a run for his money, so it'll be interesting.
Okay, we got a good one here. Jason L, how you doing? Okay, so Jason L says, how do I deal with everyone who keeps saying you care about my rights during a pandemic? You just want people to die.
It's such a lazy argument.
It's terrible because Jimmy Kimmel just. I had to double check the quote before I responded to it on Twitter. Said the same thing, and I said, like, it's an amazing thing. The one screen, two films is Jimmy Kimmel looks at somebody saying, I need to protest because I need to make a living to support my family. And he says, this person wants to die, or the person is protesting because they want to live. And it's like, that's how I respond to it. It's like you have to view it not from your own perspective, but from their perspective. And it's not a question of them wanting to die. If they wanted to die, they would sit in their home and starve to death. The point is they want to live, and they want to live with the freedoms that make this life somewhat worth living. I
can't help noticing that everyone who is making these remarks appears to be employed, like the news media and stuff, and like they have jobs, they're getting paid, and they're sneering down at these people who don't have jobs and don't have income and are going broke because, like, the average American doesn't have $500 for an emergency. We're well past that. Unemployment is going through the roof, and also there's just the raw deprivation of freedom and liberty that's a relevant interest. And some people on the left seem to want this to continue for indefinitely. And it's like this, it's so tiresome to just say, well, you want people to die. It's like, no, there's actually like more to calculate here. It's
a I don't want to use the word like stupid. It is a non-starter of a mischaracterization of the opposing view to the point where you're not going to have a meaningful discussion with that person because they're not into it for meaningful discussion. But you say that the people who say tend to be employed. I'd say they tend to be wealthy. They don't even have to be working right now, but they tend They tend to have reserves. They tend to have a nice Scotch selection in their quarantine bin.
I made the mistake of listening to Don Lemon for a couple minutes, when he was sneering at people who are like, well, I just want to get a haircut. And he made a whole rant about this on CNN for a little while until I turned it off because I was listening just to see what he had to say. And yeah, basically he's sneering at all these people. It's like, what is your problem? Like, well, you're still getting paid. Also, incidentally, not to put too fine a point on it, Don, but your hair looks like it's doing okay.
No,
is your makeup girl at CNN still doing your hair? Because I bet she is. It's like, what is,
who's the guy?
The mayor of Chicago who got her hair cut, but she's special because she appears on TV.
No, it's irritating to the point of nausea. But who's the other one there? The other guy on CNN, Cuomo.
Yeah, Cuomo too.
The one who claimed
the one who was caught by a biker.
Yeah,
out of quarantine, even though of course he wasn't, right?
No.
So, yeah, that's good times.
Okay, Steal Your Mind says clearly the right answer when there's a drone violating your Fourth Amendment rights is to chuck a javelin at it, a proverbial javelin. Oh, yes, I saw that video, the Russian guy shooting a javelin at a drone. Fantastic, great shot.
If you can capture it with a net, that would be hilarious. That'd be great.
Dude, get a hawk and get your drone hawk.
Get your own drone up and just go battle with it.
Long Reach Jones says commercial drone user here. Laws for drones change not only country to country, but sometimes down to the council level. No question. And I followed the new laws and registered my new drones and took the course and passed it. They're treated as not planes, but there's a word like aircraft. But the reality is they're treated as aircraft for the purpose of the license. But not, you have to de-ice the blades before you fly them, but they're not really aircraft. In all practical purposes, non-banned accounts should Trudeau apologize for White House Fire 1812. Well, it would. Why not? Where does it end? Daniel Silva says, why hasn't Supreme Court ruled on online free speech?
I wouldn't know for sure. I can't think of an obvious case off the top of my head. But I'm sure it's come up on one context or another. So I'm not really sure exactly what you mean. The rules for online speech would be pretty much the same as anywhere else if it's government action, which is usually the key, because a lot of these things are private action. Now, that being said, and I was thinking about doing a video on this because I'm still kind of looking into it a little bit, but Facebook was taking down posts alerting people of rallies for ending the quarantine or whatever, right? And there was a rumor. There was a rumor that it might have been because the governments of various states were asking Facebook to do it. And I was like, "Ooh, well, that's a problem." Because if it was the government asking Facebook to take it down, I'm like, well, that is state action when the government is asking for sure. And then because the posts in question aren't Facebook speech, and I know that they aren't because of CDA 230, it says it, right? The publisher is not the platform is not the publisher, right? So I put content, it's not Facebook speech. So now they are taking down someone else's speech on behalf of the government. I'm like, that would mean Facebook is possibly now a state actor. So maybe Facebook is a state actor at this point. So that's an interesting legal analysis I'm still working on, but it's interesting.
Now,
but yeah, otherwise, like online speech is treated by the same rules as it would anywhere else.
Incidentally, plug your channel, Kurt. Maybe even put it in the comment section, and I'll pin the link in the pinned comment when this gets up in public.
Very exciting.
So do it right now, and then let everybody know. Kurt has his own channel called Uncivil Law, and he's a smart dude, as everyone can see. Jason L says, my state is mandating executive order that everyone wear a mask in public. How is that not a presumption of guilt? Mask laws are based entirely on the possibility I'm infected, not that I'm actually infected. Jason, if you haven't seen it, now I took a note because I'm going to maybe publish that subsection of my stream with Robert Barnes where he addressed this and said that it could be constitutionally justified in that it might not be a constitutional violation under the circumstances. I'm going to try to find that segment and maybe republish it as a separate segment. But we did talk about that with Barnes Sunday. I don't know how long. Sunday night, I think. Holy crab apples. Okay, I missed a lot of stuff here. So, but do check it out. We got Atari Legend says, initial models assumed virus wasn't seasonal. There's a number of initial models that need revamping and sooner than later. Just the Other Life says, I'm a truck driver. No one cares about masks for me. So we have another truck driver a trucker who oftentimes comments, say, like your open road, minimum. I don't know what kind of truck driver, but minimal contact sometimes with other people, except for service stations and stuff. But whatever you do, stay safe and wash your hands, even to the point where they turn into like bloody messes. Rando E says, is there a serious risk to the legitimacy of the Supreme Court if Trump gets one or two more justice picks? Interesting.
Well, that's kind of in the eye of the beholder. I mean, I don't personally think so. I think the Republicans played an amazingly dangerous game when they did with Merrick Garland, because at the time, the indications were that Hillary was going to win. And let's just face reality. If Hillary had won, there is no way she would have appointed Merrick Garland to the bench. Merrick Garland is a fairly moderate person, all things considered. I mean, he's way too left-leaning for my taste. But in the grand scheme of everything, he's definitely more moderate than a lot of other choices. Hillary wasn't going to renominate Merrick Garland, right? That nomination was dying with Obama for sure. And if Hillary had won, she would have appointed someone way farther left. I mean, we can all see it for certain. So the Republicans played a massively dangerous game in that, but they won. So thank God for that. But like, yeah, as far as I'm concerned, they played within the bounds of the rules. Well, if they get more nominees, then they'll shift the balance of the court further right.
Some would argue, Kurt, they played a dangerous game. They may have won the battle, but they set the precedent where it resulted in the treatment of the Kavanaugh treatment during his confirmation hearing, which was oftentimes explained by animosity resulting from the treatment that Garland received.
Quite possibly, yeah. No, I think so. And there is always the possibility that like the Democrats will try to expand the size of the Supreme Court, which is a horrible idea because the Republicans would expand the size of the Supreme Court, and there's no end to that. So there's like, it's just like at the moment, and also not for least the reasons that if you look at like people have tried to do this relatively objectively, who have tried to like look at the temperaments of the justices over time, and there's various graphs that you can look at to say like how various justices have been voting on temperament, for the last 50 years. For most of the bench has been left leaning, and even up until like recently, it was been neutral at best. So if the conservatives take over the RBG seat and put in place Amy Coney Barrett, they'll shift it huge because, on these scales, like usually Ginsburg is like -3 and Amy Coney Barrett will be +3. So it's a huge shift. But it's no more illegitimate than when the left-leaning elements of the bench have the bench for 50 years, which they basically did. So the Republicans finally, and the conservatives finally have the bench. Why is that now suddenly illegitimate? I don't know. But yeah, it works for me.
Okay, now Curtis Jones says, can the Supreme Court still hear the case if they want to, even though the point is moved? They can, in theory, right? They can elect to hear questions and adjudicate.
Well, they already heard. The whole thing is so bizarre, right? Because they had already granted cert. They had already done briefing when New York State tried to moot the case, right? So the whole thing became really, really weird on the timing. So yes, the Supreme Court can hypothetically do anything. So I'm just projecting, right? Based on all the precedent that I know of, and based on what I see that they did, and based on all the issues being resolved, there's really not much substantively for the Supreme Court to try to issue a decision on. There's not much left that's alive for them to issue a decision on. So they basically have they basically could try to issue it on the stuff that's still alive somehow, which is really not kosher. Or they could try to issue an opinion even though New York State tried to moot it. Basically issue an opinion basically trying to say, well, you tried to circumvent process. So we're just going to pretend that you didn't do this and issue a decision anyway. I mean, that's more likely, but still I think those possibilities are 2%. I figured 98% chance the Supreme Court is going to say the issue is mooted. Now, they might do it mooted with further commentary. So it might not just be 2 lines. I could see them issuing it's mooted. And by the way, let us expound for a while on what we would have said if this were alive, just for some guidance. So I could see that, but I figure there's a 98% chance that they're going to issue it's mooted. If they wind up doing something hugely substantive, I'm going to be massively surprised. So, if that happens, you can all come back here and post on the comment stream later. Ha ha ha, on civil law, you were wrong. They did it anyway. You were totally an idiot. So, okay, we'll take a chance, but yeah. Would be the first time I'm massively surprised, so it could happen.
1 hour, 11 minutes, 35 seconds is where you're going to want to come back to look. Dapper Dave says Fair Tax Act would solve a lot of ills that the Fed Reserve is causing with the quarantine easing that expected to crash in the economy. How am I wrong?
So Fair Tax Act, it's been a while since I read it, but it's a modification of flat tax. So it looks to do it based on basically do some rebates, negative tax rates, I think, for people making less than certain amounts of money, and also some other similar adjustments. It's been a long time since I've read the Fair Tax Act. I'm not an expert on tax law by any stretch of the imagination. I think our issue is not really on the taxing end, but on the spending end. The entitlement programs that we have are I'd have to double check the numbers, but they're 60% of federal spending, and then another 25% of federal spending is debt. And so all the discretionary spending is cut into very little percent. Everything we argue about from year to year is 10, 15% of the budget. The massive, 85% of the budget is Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, and debt. And that's only going to get worse as people get older and retire. So we need to do something, or, at some point we're going to have austerity. We have a national debt, something like $22 trillion. And I mean, we can't maintain that forever. And now we're doing all this quantitative easement. And I was saying this before on an earlier stream, right? We are basically trying to front end the natural progressions we would normally do. Because basic economic theory 101, we want people to spend money. So we're going to create policies that make money slightly less valuable over time to give them an incentive to spend the money now, because it's worth more now than it will be later. So we want a very modest interest rate to do that. That's the normal theory. So we peg the interest rate to the normal economic growth to make the money slightly less valuable to give people an incentive to spend it now. Okay, great. But now what we're doing is we are front loading it. We're increasing the interest at a time when the economy is not growing. I'm well, you can play that game for a little while, because it will take a little bit of time for things to catch up. But if you do that for a while, at some point it's completely unsustainable. So there are definitely concerns for the economics people in the room. It's you can't do this. At some point it's going to catch up with you.
I don't think anyone would disagree with that. The only question is, how long does it go on for, and is it
someone said 26 trillion now, and I said 22 trillion. I apologize. Yeah, I was only off by a mere $4 trillion. What's $4 trillion between
20%, Kurt? Jason L says, one thing my state is testing drones to test people's temperature from afar and track those coughing and sneezing in public. Also an app to track people's COVID status, infected, uninfected. Yeah, I don't think drones are ever going to be an effective means of temperature, but yeah, seeing if people sneeze. But you don't need a drone. First of all, Jason L, thank you very much, and I hope everyone's doing well where you are. You don't need a drone for that anymore. You just need what is the meme now? Corona Karen. Like, you just need your neighbors to snitch you out. Once upon a time, like, you see people spitting on the street when they're jogging, or they they blow their nose on the street. We're going to get to a world now where if you see somebody doing that, you're going to call the cops and they're going to get arrested for disorderly conduct. It's going to be crazy. But okay, good. Now there's been a lull in the super chats. I think I just saw one that I didn't get to because I want to get to the actual questions. Oh, I missed a lot. So that's good. I see one. I apologize. I'm missing some super chats. Why are the lefty judges most wrong on everything? LOLs, rhetorical question. Daniel, thank you for the question. Thank you for the super chat.
And then they have completely different and broken legal philosophies.
Jim Satalis says, first of all, they've all been right and they've all been wrong. It's whether or not one is more is a question of perspective. But I know the leaning of the subscribers to this channel, so I know where most people are at in terms of mental framework. Jim Satalis says, considering there are over 3 million full auto firearms on NFA registry, would that be considered in common use as defined by Heller? You need to field this one, Kurt. I don't know this.
Yeah, there is not sufficient groundwork to make that argument now. Like, even if that argument is ultimately correct, there is not sufficient groundwork to make it. It's like trying to build a tower without the base in place. It's going to collapse. If you walk into court with that argument today, it's going to completely fail and probably go backwards. There's just not the framework for that. Like, as I was saying before, when Heller came into place, the argument ultimately that they went to court with, and the ultimate argument they ultimately argued, to some criticism from the gun rights people, was you have a right to keep a handgun in the home. Okay, that's a pretty narrow argument. It's a very narrow argument, and even that was 5-4. Okay, so given that knowledge, do you really think you can walk into a court today and get them to say, oh yes, machine guns are commonly used within the meaning of Heller? Absolutely not. No, there's just no way you're going to get a court to do that. So if you want to get there, you have to have like 10 more foundational cases before you can get there. You're leaping way too far ahead of the page. So what the gun rights people really need to do, at least as far as the legal structure is concerned, right? What they need to do is they need to create a right to bear case. They got the most narrow right to keep case possible, right? A handgun in the home. That's about as narrow as you can possibly get. So they need a right to bear case of any kind. The right to take the handgun or out of the home as a fundamental individual right under some circumstances, whatever it is, so that you can build on it. And like the idea that you could take it to the shooting range to practice with it was actually a pretty good idea because it helps to solve a lot of other arguments too. So it was actually a pretty good foundational case. But apparently that's being taken away. So, maybe like you could get the Supreme Court to say there's a right to carry under either open or concealed. So like maybe the Peruta case, which is still ongoing in the California cases, will be the way to get there, because the Ninth Circuit has already said there's no right to open carry, then said there's no right to concealed carry. So now they're like working those cases back again after they got each one separately reversed, right? Now they're working cases through to try to get a case to answer both questions at the same time in one case. They want the court to be able to say there's no right to carry concealed and no right to carry open in the same case to get to the U.S. Supreme Court. And even if they do, then the Ninth Circuit then California would change their mind just to moot the case. But it's like you need some sort of foundation before you can go to the machine gun thing. The machine gun thing is not happening today. I'm sorry. It's just there's just not the foundation for it.
And incidentally, just so everybody appreciates the distinction between the U.S. and Canada. In Canada, you're not allowed owning a firearm for home protection. So even if you have a weapon that you take to the range for shooting, you can have it for shooting, but not for home protection. You can't have a rifle for home protection. And so when it's in your house, it has to be stored in a certain manner. Bullets, munitions away from the weapon, lock on it. Rifles, if they're on display, they have to be displayed on a certain way. You can transport your weapon to and from the range from your house, but it has to be transported in a certain way. Same thing for rifles. So we're in a totally different world. Full registration, all sorts of things. where was I going with that? I was going with that into segueing into my comment, which I'm going to get to after this super chat. Spring allergy season is going to be interesting. Stefan Mattis. Hell yeah. Anybody sneezes on the street right now, it's like an act of aggression. Kurt, this was my response. Someone said, you don't think someone should be able to loan their gun to a friend or loan their friend a gun? Should they be able to loan a baseball bat, car, gasoline, lighter, hammer, chainsaw? Guns are inanimate objects and tools. They can be dangerous just like everything else. It's just an emotional argument to say otherwise. And I just said, please read this response with the sincere tone in which it's written. Should someone be able to lend their friend prescription Adderall, Valium, a commercial snowplow, which people took issue with, a construction crane without consequence? Should they be allowed to loan these things to a 10-year-old? I think we can all agree on certain restrictions on the lending of property, even private property, on certain conditions, notwithstanding the fact that it is nonetheless private property. The question is only to agree on what conditions. So, I mean, what is your perspective and what is your understanding under U.S. law on the right to transfer, to lend, to loan a firearm to anybody? Let's just start with anybody. Is it unrestricted under the state's law?
To the best of my knowledge, under the state of the law now, I mean, what you can do, if you're asking me like what the floor is, there's so many different ways to parse that question. But yes, under some various state laws, you can transfer firearms to varying levels of freedom. You know, as far as I know, in Texas and definitely in my former home state of Virginia, at least until July 1st, because they just changed the law. So I haven't looked it up in terms of how they changed it. But at least as of today in Virginia, yes, you can just land a gun to your neighbor without any kind of paperwork or any kind of background check. And as far as I'm aware, that's true in Texas as well. There are a lot of states where you can't do that and you need to go through background checks. I think Oregon, for example, California, for example, I believe Colorado, but don't quote me on that. But yeah, there are a lot of states with more restrictions than others. So some states you can as a matter of practice. If you're asking me about the constitutional law, like what does the Constitution allow the government to do? To the best of my knowledge, there's no case right now anywhere that says that you have a right to like transfer a gun to anyone under any circumstances that I'm aware of. So I mean, I haven't read every case that exists. There might be, because there's lots of different circuits, but to the best of my knowledge, no, you don't have a constitutional right to do so. Should you have one? Yeah, probably, because, it does speak to a fundamental right. The analogy to the prescription drugs is slightly off point because there's not a constitutional right to do that. And there is a right to own a firearm. So the analogy would be closer can you lend your neighbor a book?
Oh, no, hold on.
So the analogy is a little closer there.
Well, no, here's the issue, because there's not a constitutional right to prescription drugs or, let's say, a car,
right?
Specifically, but there is the right to property. So,
yes.
Which I don't know which amendment that is or which part of the Constitution, but there is a right to ownership of property. So therein lies the distinction. Like, okay, I have the constitutional right not to be deprived of my property.
Yes.
Does that mean that I have the constitutional right to lend any and all of my property to whomever I so want without consequence, without restrictions, without potential sanctions? Then the argument would be no. So like someone's like, yeah, I'm trying to think. A chainsaw is not a Second Amendment right. Maybe it is. That might be a bad example. But prescription drugs, not a Second Amendment protected right, but property is a protected right. So any property and the right not to be deprived of it is a constitutional right. Does that mean that I have the right not to be deprived of my property entails that I have the right to transfer it or loan it to whoever I want without consequence? And
so you would have to answer the question of whether or not the right to transfer is itself a property right that is part of this analysis. So like the ring is the piece of property. So we can't deprive you of the ring, but can we deprive you of your right to transfer the ring? So you'd have to argue not just that the ring is property, but the right to transfer in and of itself is property that you can't be deprived of, which is a little bit different.
Yeah, no, 100%. Or can it be meaningfully regulated on certain items versus others? Like the funny thing is, most people would say, yeah, of course you can't transfer prescription drugs, or if you do and somebody ODs or you give it to a kid for a weekend party and they die, obviously you should be held responsible. And then they say, okay, we can agree with that. And I think most people do agree with that. And then I think most people would agree, like if you lend your weapon to a 13-year-old and they kill themselves or they kill someone else with it, maybe the owner of that weapon can reasonably be held responsible. And I think to some extent, a lot of people would nonetheless agree with that. And in which case, it might be semantics. Like, okay, you can do what you want with it, but if there's a consequence, the owner of the property should be held responsible if it was a reckless or negligent transfer or temporary loan to whomever. If they lend it to a convicted felon, like some people were saying, well, convicted felons can't own a gun. So to the extent you can lend it to somebody who can otherwise own it, that's fine. Then we all agree, yeah. But that's already a restriction on who you can lend it to in any event. To lend it to somebody who can otherwise own it is a restriction that a lot of people would agree with. Now, let me see. I need to get to not a banned account because I don't want to look like I'm ignoring this. Respectfully, to what extent are you pro gun control? I would imagine, just on a personal level, that I am much more pro gun rights than I am pro gun control. But I still can think of certain common sense restrictions or common sense procedure that I would put in place, even in a country that I would deem to be a right to own a weapon for self-defense. So then the question is just, how do you qualify gun control, or how do you define it? I think people should be allowed to defend their home, period. Now the question is, where's the gray zone, and what are the restrictions that I think would be reasonable? That's just these are the force where everybody gets lost in the discussion. A convicted felon can possess a musket, can't have ammo.
Yeah, he's technically right, because according to the law, a firearm is only a firearm if it was made after 1898. So anything made before 1898 is not a firearm.
Okay, but
there you go. Good
okay.
one.
Yeah. Thoughts on the new FGC 9 3D printed gun? I don't know anything about it.
No particular thoughts. All these firearms that have been 3D printed, as far as I'm aware, have always fallen apart. They've never been reliable for anything. But, I have no particular objection to people 3D printing firearms. I have no particular objection to Defense Distributed trying to make their information available. I don't think the State Department can prevent the spread of computer code. And I know the U.S. government dropped its part of the case, as far as I'm aware, but the states are still trying to keep it going. So, yeah, I don't have any particular objection to it. I don't know how functional it will be, but
that's it. I guess
you do you.
If depending on what you need it for, you only need it for a single use purpose. But I mean, if it's for home defense or whatever. So my DP12 next to my bed is a no-go in Canada. I don't know what that is, but I'm going to suspect yes, because that would not be stored legally under Canadian law. Nope. Okay, I'm going to blast through these here because I see the Michael F. What about Satana versus Massachusetts? I thought the 2A applied to all weapons.
Sure, it does.
It only apply to part of the
yes,
section.
it applies to all kinds of arms. Usually I use firearms as shorthand because that's usually what we're talking about. But yeah, absolutely. The Second Amendment would apply to all kinds of arms. So apply to knives and apply to anything else that's arms. So, and I believe, if memory serves correctly, it's been a while, but I believe Centenaro v. Massachusetts dealt with stun guns. How good is my memory? But yes, I believe that case dealt with stun guns, and it said that you did have a right to have a stun gun under the Second Amendment. So yes, it doesn't only mean firearms; it means all kinds of arms.
And
yes.
And by the way, stun guns are certain stun guns. Most stun guns are illegal in Canada. Pepper spray paintball guns are illegal to possess in Canada. There was the salt gun. You know this is it's a paintball gun that shoots pepper spray.
Yes,
illegal in Canada. Couldn't get it.
Really?
No, yeah, no. It's next flu season is going to be rough. Expect lockdowns. We'll see what case law is set out by next flu season and what the general framework of society is after having seen the consequences of this. But we'll see. It is definitely going to be interesting. John Andrews, any advice for starting a legal career in your 40s? I'm 39, retiring from the Army this year, thinking about law school. Is it a bad idea? Hell no, it's a great idea. Whether or not you ever practice, it's a great idea.
My advice here would be to have a very good idea of what you want to do with it afterwards, and if possible, talk to someone who does that. And if you can, even volunteer, even if you work for free for a couple months as a person in their office, you'd probably be well advised to do so. And the reason I say that is because it may not be what you want to be, it may not be what you imagine to be, and you will go into a lot of debt in law school. So you have to look at the economics of it and whether or not it's going to be viable for the amount of debt you're going to carry. And it would probably be beneficial, even if you had to work for free, to do so in a couple months in the office just to feel like it'd be worth your time. So have a really good idea what you want to do before you do law school, would be my advice.
Incidentally, that is Gary. I don't know if you watch Gary Vaynerchuk, Kurt, but that's Gary Vaynerchuk advice, except he said do it in your 20s, not necessarily in your 40s, but it is good advice. Is work for free to get the experience, to get the knowledge, to get the taste for what it is.
And for what it's worth, I knew a lot of people in law school who did second careers. I don't know how common this is in Canada, but it's very common in the United States.
Well,
that people are doing second careers. So there's a lot of people fresh out of undergrad like me, and a lot of people are doing second careers. So you would not be the only 40-year-old going to law school.
No, but also 40 is the new 30, and as you have the rest of you have another 30 years, you have 30 years of good professional work. Okay, I'm losing some of the spirit of. Is there a point where SC, the Supreme Court, could see a pattern of states mooting firearms related cases and decide to proceed anyways? Okay, we got to that one earlier, but thank you very much for
they can ultimately do what they want, and yeah, I think as it happens more and more, they become more and more frustrated. But yeah.
Okay, now we got Tony Nieves says absolutist arguments or interpretation, Raw versus Ray.
I don't know if those acronyms are. I apologize.
Tony Nieves, thank you. Spartan Chuckle says possibly for certain things if they know how to use competent or licensed, like chainsaw cranes vehicles. Well, but then even the idea of license, people use the term license. Well, you don't lend a vehicle to an underage kid because they're not licensed. License is regulation. And then the question is, we accept that you license for cars, but not for weapons because Second Amendment. But it is even that characterization is infused with certain restrictions that are just in the terminology. Going to give a crazy theory if China is willingly stayed quiet about Corona and their national spread virus worldwide. Can it be classified as war crimes? The discussion is out there. There's a lawsuit. I'm going to maybe read it from the state against China.
I don't know about war crimes, but you could go cause belly. So they got that going for you.
We got if you make the gun, you have it on. If you make the gun, you can have it unregistered. Yeah,
I believe that's true in most states. I don't know if that's necessarily true in California, but yes, at least under federal law, if you manufacture the firearm itself, then you don't have to have it registered. You don't even have to put a serial number on it. So that is true.
Okay, now I see this. That's the one we were just at. We got
federal law.
Okay. S. Jar Jar Binks. Okay, got a rabbit hole for you. If the government shall make no law when you get convicted of a crime, you'll get shot by a cop or rearrested if you ever get a gun again. Got a rabbit hole for you. If the government shall make no law when you get convicted of a crime, you'll get shot by a cop or rearrested if you ever get a gun again.
So I basically, they're trying to ask me whether the way I'm going to parse that question is whether or not being convicted of a crime is sufficient to deprive you of liberty, of the Second Amendment liberty, because it's like it shall make no law, right? So at least under the case law right now, yes, because for no small part because of Scalia's throwaway paragraph in Heller, where he throws in the middle for no particular reason. He's like, oh, by the way, all these presumptive things are still legal, like the bans on felons, not having with school zones, and so forth and so on. And there have been a couple people who have tried to bring cases for people who have been convicted of felonies or people who have been adjudicated mentally ill. I'm trying to think. There might have been even one or two successful ones. I couldn't swear to it, but I seem to vaguely recall there was one felon or one person who was disqualified who the court said as applied to them, they couldn't continue to be banned. So I think maybe one person has been successful, but I know a lot of people who haven't, including mentally ill case. So yeah, it's all over the map right now.
Okay, now Matthew Maddox says, I hate when people say common sense restrictions. It sounds like you don't have common sense if you disagree. That depends on who's saying it. I would say that common sense is a broad spectrum where some people might have different versions or different interpretations or different variants of what common sense is without necessarily judging the other person's equally good common sense. I can understand what we would typically fit within the broad spectrum of common sense. I think the judgmental part is more individual. And it's midnight, and I didn't realize it's midnight. Okay, we're gonna start winding this up sooner than later. I think we've talked about it. Let's see. We got Viva Frei says 3D printed guns are lasting thousands of rounds. Very interesting. I mean, don't have that here. Joshua Cornelius. Then I think to myself, what a wonderful world. That's all I have got tonight. I'm all politics out and thinking happy thoughts. Peace, y'all. Joshua, as always, be safe. Thank you very much. Good to see you again. New member, collector. And I want to make sure that I'm not. Oh, my goodness. Okay, we got Stephanie Mattis says, in Canada, antique firearm was made prior to 1898. No permit, no license, but read the details. Yes. So there's a specific requirement about antique firearms, which can carry, I think, a maximum of 2, maybe 4 rounds of musket pellets. Not what we typically think would be capable for use in mass violent incidents. And we got Mr. Bigum Slayer says, so if I give food to a fat person, am I now responsible for them being fat? What if they have heart disease? Well, that would be no, but I guess it all goes back to causation. It goes back to probabilities, and it goes back to the inherent nature of the object that is so being transferred. Which is why
Tater Raider is reminding me that he asked me to ask you about having Colion Noir sometime. He's a lawyer and a gun rights activist. So he'd be an interesting get if you want to talk about firearms issues. He knows a lot of stuff too, but he might be an interesting guy to get.
Matt the Hazard says, did you get the email I sent you with the vid about SARS-CoV-19 stats? I think I did, because I got a few of them, actually. Do me a favor and don't take it personally. Send it to me again, david@vivafrei.com. But I'm fairly certain I got it, because I do remember seeing it. Okay, I think I missed something. But okay, I got McConnell. I got, how do you define common sense gun control, and what would you add to current laws? Hold on one second. I don't see that. That's collector. Where is collector? Oh my goodness, I missed a lot. Here's collector. How do you define common sense gun control, and what would you add to current laws? Well, in Canada, I certainly wouldn't add anything to current laws. I think Canada is well beyond what most people would agree is common sense gun control. And right now it's sort of, I took the course, I studied, I followed the course. It's almost criminalizing gun ownership, or at least not criminalizing gun ownership, but it makes it so potentially costly that it is a deterrent. Whereas if you're caught with a loaded weapon in the house, it's potentially 5 years in jail, or don't know exactly what the penalty is, but it's years in jail, thousands of dollars fines, to the point where I'm like, crap, hey, good, I have the right to do it. The penalties are so severe that I don't even want to do it. So I certainly I would not add anything to Canada. To the States, it's too nuanced, and it's too state by state, and I don't want to venture into it. But first of all, welcome, new member collector. Welcome to the channel. Welcome to everything. Welcome to the party. Daniel Silva says, Pulliam versus Allen, sitting judge can be sued in injunction of relief. I don't know.
Not familiar with the case, sorry.
I don't think judges can very easily be sued too often. El Rojo Grande says, just curious, since it's in the news, how do both of you feel about the stare decisis? Which one?
Yeah, well, it was in the news because of the non-unanimous jury thing. I spent 3 hours live streaming that decision as I tried to dissect it and understand it, because it had a complicated voting pattern. But stare decisis, thing decided. So, there are obviously decisions of the U.S. Supreme Court we probably would like to overrule and don't want to stand forever. Dred Scott, Plessy versus Ferguson, at Korematsu, add your choice, right? But by the same token, we probably don't want to be overturning things all the time. So the question is, under what circumstances should we overturn cases? And there's a lot of different views on this. Like, I always go to O'Connor's opinion in Casey versus Planned Parenthood, which shows different standards to do it. So it's it's on workability. It's been proven, it's been undermined by later cases and development or whatever. That particular case I thought was pretty garbage because it stood outside of everything else. It did this halfway incorporation thing, which no other case had ever done. So I was like, yeah, this doesn't make any sense. So I think cases should be reversed when they should be reversed, which isn't particularly helpful in terms of answering your question. But as a general proposition, we want the law to be predictable but not stand still. So it's a challenge.
And typically, to overturn the highest court's decisions, there has to be something of a paradigm shift, advance in technology, advance in some sort of objective, if I can even say the word objective morality, objective sort of sociology, and it can't be whimsical, but we can get to the point where there has been such a shift in technology and society that maybe Sullivan versus New York Times, it might be time to revisit it 50 years later, given the way things have evolved with social media, with media.
I want to undo Wickard v. Filburn. I want to undo Chevron. I want to undo Brand X. I want to undo Our, and I want to undo the slaughterhouse cases to start. So that would be.
I know. I think I
my
need two of those. Okay, Jason McConnell says using a weapon for self-defense is illegal in Canada, but the Gerald Stanley acquittal in the shooting of Colton Boushie in 2018 shows the public doesn't always share the government's opinion. No, I don't. I talk to people. I don't think most people who are even fervent anti-gun or pro-gun control agree that we should not be allowed to have a weapon in the house for self-defense. I don't even think I talk to a lot of people. I don't think most people are down with that, and especially when they need one, and especially when it becomes an urgency for them, and you can't rely on the police to get there within 30 seconds. A lot of people don't feel quite so strongly once they've had their run-ins and they've had their experience. But yeah, no, there's no question. There's a disconnect between politics and the lowly hoi polloi, and that's what makes the politicians out of touch after a given point.
Someone was asking about overturning Roe versus Wade. I don't think there's the votes to do it. I do not see Roberts overturning Roe versus Wade. I don't see him doing it. So I do not see the votes to overturn Roe versus Wade on the Supreme Court.
So yeah, with that might come to the actual more than a hypothetical legal for sooner than later. Jim Stout says ATF department responsible for firearm disability removal hasn't been funded since 1996. That should be used to challenge blanket felon prohibition.
Yeah.
Okay, it's interesting. I mean, the felon prohibition is another issue. What other rights, Kurt? Do felons they potentially lose the right to vote?
Mm-hmm. And the right to be on juries.
And the right to bear arms.
Yeah, that's all I can think of at the top of my head. Yes.
Okay. Okay. So now we're my goodness. First of all, time flies. Kurt, what time is it where you are? It's 11:30. It's 11:10.
11:10. Yeah, 11:10.
Uncivil law. Didn't we just discuss not overturning case law? Touche.
Confused.
Well, because you said which 5 decisions you would overturn if you had your choice.
Well, I was saying that there's a whole balance, and then I was saying here's a whole bunch of cases I want to go away. What's contradictory about that?
Oh, it was tongue in cheek. I want to bring up comments that are not super chats so we can spread we can all share in the community side here. But I want to make sure that I'm not bringing up Citizens United. Citizens United.
I agree with Citizens United. I thought it was correctly decided. It did overturn some other cases, so Citizens United itself overturned precedent. But I agree with Citizens United. I've done a couple of videos on it. I think it was correctly decided.
Okay, we got wash your hands. Oh, that's his name. Sorry, I thought someone was telling us to wash our hands. I'm joking. I saw that. Kavanaugh Roberts talked about overturning Roe versus Wade.
Yeah, there's not the votes for it.
Okay, well, we'll see where that goes. Okay, great discussion. Thank you both. You know what, Kurt? Let's do it because it's freaking late. My wife is gonna not kill me, but if I wake her up when I get into bed, wash your hands. Oh my God, I'm hurt. If I wake her up, and we go. Okay, I want to say one for civil law. What are your all favorite judicial TV shows?
I'm a fan of the original Law and Order, man. I like the classic Law and Order.
I like The Simpsons dealing with law. I didn't get into Suits all that much. L.A. Law was good. Night Court. Night Court might be my favorite, actually. But I don't know. Is that law?
No.
Okay. And we got thank you guys for your insight. People, so thank you very much. I should have a video tomorrow. I tried to get one out today, but it's not possible. It's not possible. Things are just there's too much going on with everybody at home, and it's tough to stay sane. I hope everybody else out there is doing good. Stay healthy, stay sane, exercise, sunlight, vitamin D, vitamin C, Horoscopian. Thank you for answering my questions. I hope I didn't miss too many. I don't think I missed many. But thank you all for tuning in. I'm going to end it now. I'm going to talk with Kurt for a few minutes afterwards. Check out Kurt's channel. Subscribe. He has a different style than me, as I can imagine most of you can anticipate. Also an encyclopedia. There's Kurt, there's Nate Brody, Uncivil Law, and then everyone else. Does better. Oh, you know what? I did watch Better Call Saul.
And there's other lawyers who have blocked us from participating on their channel.
Apparently Kurt's been blocked. I don't know that I've been blocked, even if I think I've been blocked.
We've all been blocked.
I would chalk it up to the YouTube blocking things. But I don't know what. I'm trying to
deliberately. You know who you are.
All that I know is that, I know certain other YouTube lawyers are looking for, to do collabs and whatever. I would collab with anybody, but I think by virtue of me having collab with certain people, I'm now on the, what's the word? Persona non grata list of other people. But it is what it is. Free speech and open discourse has its risks and perils, but I like those. So with that said, people, have a good night. Thank you for tuning in, and I'll see you on the interwebs in the next live stream. Peace out now.